The second click came where no second click belonged. Miss Phoebe Dunsmore heard it above the violins at the Bath Upper Rooms on the evening of the 20th of October 1817. A sharp little sound beneath the music, too precise to be accident and too faint for anyone who did not spend her life counting movement. Around her, 6 sets of dancers continued through the quadrille beneath the chandeliers. Silk skirts turned, gloves rose and fell. Mothers smiled from the benches as though every step before them had been arranged only for pleasure. Phoebe knew better. She stood beside her aunt, Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore, with one hand resting lightly against the fold of her pale grey gown. The silver leaf pattern buckles on her slippers had belonged to her mother. They were old, carefully polished, and modest enough not to draw attention. Phoebe herself had long since learned how easily a woman could become invisible while teaching others how to be seen. "You heard it," Winifred murmured. "2 signals," Phoebe said. "There should have been one." Her aunt followed her gaze toward the gentleman directing the figures. The master of ceremonies had appointed him for the evening, and he stood near the musicians with a beechwood staff in hand. A brass ferule gleamed beneath his fingers. He had tapped once to guide the change. Then, half a heartbeat later, he had made the second click. The orchestra had answered with 16 additional bars. Most of the room would hear only a graceful extension. Phoebe saw what the music did. Miss Lydia Penrose, 18 and newly brought into Bath society, had begun the figure in clear view of her aunt. A copper rosette had been pinned to the corner of her card, bright against the cream paper. With each change, Lydia's partner shifted. The first gentleman turned her toward the western side. The second received her a little farther from the benches. The third moved her behind a passing line of dancers. The pattern looked elegant because elegance was often the finest disguise for control. "Her aunt can't see her now," Winifred said. "Not for 3 changes." Phoebe counted under her breath. The added bars were not decorative. They were moving Lydia toward the passage beside the west salon, where the light narrowed and a woman might be separated from her chaperone before anyone admitted noticing. Phoebe looked toward the edge of the floor. One man was not watching the dancers. Peregrine Haverstock, Duke of Westerdale, stood alone near the western wall with his attention fixed upon the doors. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and motionless enough to seem carved from the darker paneling behind him. Bath gave him space without being asked. 6 seasons earlier, his younger sister, Lady Alice Haverstock, had died after leaving a crowded assembly by the western side rooms. The Duke had stopped the music, closed the doors, and accused his cousin before half the room. No proof had followed. Society remembered his temper more readily than it remembered the dead woman. Since that night, no lady had asked him to dance. Phoebe saw the moment his gaze settled on Lydia. He had noticed the direction of her movement. He had not yet understood the count. "If I stop the figure from here, they'll all look at Lydia," Phoebe said. "And if you don't?" Winifred asked. Phoebe watched the next turn place Lydia behind 2 couples and 1 ornamental column. Then she'll reach the passage. The sensible response would have been to summon the master of ceremonies. The respectable response would have been to whisper to Lydia's aunt. Both would take too long. Phoebe had spent years teaching young women how to enter drawing rooms, how to lower their eyes without surrendering awareness, and how to refuse a hand without creating a public scene. No lesson had prepared her to watch a girl be carried toward danger by perfect form. Phoebe stepped away from the wall. Conversation faltered around her before anyone understood why. She crossed the edge of the floor, not toward Lydia, but toward the man society had left untouched for 6 years. Peregrine saw her coming. Something changed in his face. Not surprise alone, recognition. She stopped before him and offered her gloved hand. "Your Grace, will you dance with me?" The silence spread faster than music. A dowager lowered her fan. One of the patronesses turned so sharply that the feathers in her hair trembled. Peregrine looked at Phoebe's hand, then at Lydia, then at the west passage. "This quadrille is already formed," he said. "Then we'll alter the figure before someone else does." His eyes returned to hers. They were not cold, as Bath claimed. They were tired, watchful, and suddenly alive. "You know where she's being sent. I know where the music will leave her. And you expect me to follow? I do." For the first time that evening, the Duke of Westerdale smiled. It was brief and without amusement. Then led. He placed his gloved hand in hers. The contact was correct, public, and no more intimate than the figure required. Yet Phoebe felt the force of every eye upon them as they stepped into the moving set. Peregrine did not seize the direction. He waited. At the next change, Phoebe gave the lightest pressure through her fingers. He turned when she asked. They entered between two couples. At the moment, the added phrase began. Phoebe counted 4 bars, then 8. She shifted their line by 1 measured step. Peregrine matched her without anticipating. At 12 bars, she guided him across the route intended for Lydia. His presence forced one gentleman to yield. That gentleman's retreat altered the next pair. Lydia's partner lost the western opening and returned her toward the center. The whole correction took less than half a minute. To the room it appeared daring. To Phoebe it was geometry. To Peregrine, judging by the tightening of his hand once around hers, it was something remembered. Lydia emerged beside her aunt before the final turn. Relief crossed the girl's face and vanished quickly beneath training. The musicians completed the proper cadence. The set ended in order. For one suspended moment, no one applauded. Peregrine released Phoebe's hand only when etiquette required it. He bowed lower than necessity demanded. "Miss Dunsmore." The use of her name sent another whisper through the room. "Your Grace." "You prevented Miss Penrose from leaving the floor. We prevented it. You gave the direction. You were the only man in the room watching the doors." His expression changed again. The words had reached a place praise would not. He looked toward Lydia, now safely beside her aunt, then toward the gentleman who had directed the figures. The beechwood staff had lowered. The brass ferrule turned beneath the man's thumb and gave a small solitary click. Peregrine went still. "That sound," he said. "I heard it 6 years ago." Phoebe kept her voice low. "Before Lady Alice left the ballroom. Before the music changed." Across the room, Lady Minerva Haverstock sat among the patronesses in black silk, one hand resting upon the head of her cane. Her face remained composed, but her gaze fixed upon Phoebe with new precision. Beside her, Mr. Dominic Haverstock leaned close enough to hear her whisper, "That woman must not direct another figure." Dominic's mouth curved without warmth. "Then we'll give Bath another reason to doubt her." Phoebe did not hear the words. She saw only that Minerva had spoken, and Dominic had looked toward the copper rosette on Lydia's card. The evening had not ended with a rescued girl. It had begun with a signal, and someone in the room already feared that Phoebe had understood it. By 11 o'clock on the morning of the 21st October, Peregrine Haverstock's calling card lay upon the silver salver in Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore's drawing room, and the Duke stood at the threshold waiting to be admitted. Phoebe had expected urgency after the events at the upper rooms. She had not expected restraint. He had sent no commanding message, no carriage, and no servant with instructions. He had requested a proper morning call, and Winifred remained in the room when he entered. "Your Grace," she said, "Mrs. Dunsmore." Peregrine bowed, then turned to Phoebe. "Miss Dunsmore, Your Grace." Phoebe had spent the early hours drawing the quadrille from memory. 2 sheets lay upon the table. The first showed the lawful figure, with each couple finishing in the center. The second showed the additional 16 bars and the route that had carried Lydia Penrose toward the western passage. Peregrine looked at them before he sat. "You drew this last night, before the details could soften, and you're certain the second pattern wasn't merely an improvised variation?" "I'm certain only of what I saw." Phoebe placed one finger beside Lydia's first position. A copper rosette had been pinned to her card. The appointed dance master gave 2 close signals instead of 1. The orchestra added 16 bars. 3 partner changes moved Miss Penrose beyond her aunt's sightline and toward the west salon. When you and I altered one crossing, the route failed. Peregrine's gaze remained on the page. "You don't accuse easily. An accusation isn't strengthened by adding what I didn't observe. Dominic would call that caution. A cautious truth is still more dangerous than a dramatic lie." The faintest change touched his expression. Not a smile, recognition. He leaned closer to the drawing without touching it. "Alice noticed sudden engagements," he said. "Not one, several. Young women were seen near side rooms, and within days their families either accepted matches they had resisted or left Bath after private payments." Peregrine's voice had lowered, though Winifred remained close enough to hear every word. Alice believed the meetings were arranged before the women entered the ballroom. She said the witnesses always arrived too quickly and stood too conveniently. I told her that if she spoke without proof, she would destroy the reputations of the very women she meant to defend. "What did she say?" Phoebe asked. His eyes lifted to hers. "She said I no longer knew the difference between protecting honor and protecting silence." Peregrine looked back at the papers. "We argued. I wanted the matter handled within the family because Dominic's name had already appeared in 2 of the rumors. Alice intended to go to the Master of Ceremonies that night. I told her she wouldn't leave until she listened to reason." His jaw tightened. "She left anyway." "By the western passage." "Yes." He did not look away from the memory. The music changed after a double signal. Minutes later, Alice was found below the service stair. Winifred's hands became still in her lap. Phoebe asked the question carefully. "Did you see what happened?" "No. Did anyone?" "Not anyone who spoke plainly." Peregrine sat back. "Dominic said Alice had fled after our quarrel. My aunt said grief had made her confused. I stopped the music, closed the doors, and accused Dominic before half the room. I had suspicion and rage. I had no proof. What happened to the people in the passage? They became afraid of me, and the evidence. Whatever remained was swallowed by family influence and public embarrassment." He drew a slow breath. "Society remembered that I had lost control. It didn't remember what Alice had tried to say." Phoebe studied the man before her. Bath called him cold because coldness was easier to understand than grief held too tightly. Yet what she saw was not absence of feeling. It was feeling forced into rigid shape. "Is that why you stopped dancing?" she asked. Peregrine was silent long enough that the question might have been refused. "At first, I thought entering another ballroom would mean I had forgiven what happened." His voice was quiet. "Then I discovered that, refusing society, looked stronger than admitting it frightened me. Phoebe respected the confession enough not to soften it. Last night you entered the figure, because you asked me to move before fear could decide for me. I asked you to follow, and I did. His gaze met hers with a steadiness that changed the air. You didn't make me dance, Miss Dunsmore. You gave me a reason to move. Phoebe felt the words more deeply than she allowed her expression to reveal. She turned the second drawing toward him. Then let us use movement rather than memory. Peregrine nodded once. The directing staff is still at the upper rooms. After the ball, I asked the Master of Ceremonies to place it in the steward's cabinet. You asked him to preserve it. Yes, I didn't seize it. It belongs to the subscription proprietors, not to me. Who has access to the cabinet? The Master of Ceremonies and the steward. It can be opened in their presence. Has Dominic touched the staff since last night? Not to my knowledge. And Lady Minerva? She objected to its being put away. She said it was committee property needed for the next assembly. Phoebe glanced at Winifred. Her aunt gave a slight nod. I'll inspect it under 3 conditions. Peregrine waited. He did not say that his rank could arrange whatever he pleased. First, my aunt remains present, or another proper chaperone if illness prevents her. Agreed. Second, the Master of Ceremonies retains authority over the room, the staff, and the musicians. Agreed. Third, every observation I make is recorded under my name, not as your conclusion, not as a favor to me, mine. Peregrine repeated the condition without alteration. Every observation will be recorded under the name of Miss Phoebe Dunsmore. Winifred looked from him to Phoebe, and something quiet passed across her face. Peregrine had not merely consented, he had listened closely enough to preserve the point. Then I'll examine the figure, Phoebe said, not accuse anyone. That distinction may be the only thing keeping the truth from becoming another rumor. He looked again at the copper mark she had drawn beside Lydia's position. There's something else you should know. About the rosette. 6 years ago, my aunt controlled every copper rosette used to mark favored positions at the assemblies. Phoebe's fingers stilled upon the paper. Did she pin them herself? Sometimes. More often, her maid or one of the patronesses did it at her instruction. Was Alice marked that night? Peregrine's expression hardened with uncertainty. I don't know. I remember a copper glint on her card. But memory, after grief, is a treacherous witness. I won't call it proof. The answer increased Phoebe's trust because it respected the limit. A knock sounded at the drawing-room door. The servant entered with a folded note addressed to Peregrine. He read it, then handed it to Phoebe. The Master of Ceremonies had granted a daytime inspection of the upper rooms on the 23 October. The appointed dance master, the orchestra leader, the steward, and Mr. Elias Crowther would be present. The directing staff would remain locked in the cabinet until all witnesses had assembled. Phoebe folded the note once. Then we begin with what the room can still show us. Peregrine rose, but did not offer his hand. Their first touch belonged to the quadrille, and neither of them attempted to repeat it before trust had earned another. At the door, he paused. Miss Dunsmore, if the staff proves ordinary, will you say so? Yes. And if it doesn't? Phoebe looked toward the 2 drawings, one lawful and one designed to leave a young woman beside a darkened passage. Then Bath will have to decide whether it fears an object more than the people who learned to use it. On the morning of the 23rd October, the Bath upper rooms looked less like the center of fashionable life than a stage after the audience had gone. Daylight revealed what chandeliers softened. The polished floor showed faint arcs left by hundreds of slippers, and the western passage appeared narrower without silk and candlelight to disguise it. Phoebe entered with Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore, and found the others assembled near the steward's cabinet. Peregrine stood beside Mr. Elias Crowther. The master of ceremonies held the key. The orchestra leader waited near 4 musicians, while the appointed dance master remained at a careful distance from the locked door. "We'll begin with the object's condition," Crowther said. "No, one will handle it until the time and witnesses are recorded." The cabinet had not been formally sealed after the ball, but the steward confirmed that the key had remained in his possession, and that the master of ceremonies held the only duplicate. Crowther recorded both statements without claiming more than the men could prove. Then the cabinet was opened. The beechwood directing staff lay across the upper shelf, where Peregrine had been told it was placed. The dance master lifted it only after Crowther named him as temporary handler. Phoebe approached without touching it. The staff was plain except for a brass ferrule below the grip. In daylight, the metal no longer seemed decorative. It sat slightly uneven against the wood, and a narrow seam showed where the fitting could turn. "Was it always loose?" Phoebe asked. The dance master frowned. "Not that I noticed. Did you use pressure here when signaling?" She indicated the ferrule. "Sometimes. The sound carries better if the staff strikes with the metal angled downward." "Did you turn it?" "I may have. I don't remember." Crowther recorded the answer. Peregrine did not accuse the man. "May Miss Dunsmore examine the movement without opening the fitting?" he asked. The master of ceremonies agreed. Phoebe used a folded handkerchief to steady the wood and moved the ferrule less than a quarter turn. Something resisted beneath it, then released with a faint click. Every person in the room heard it. "That isn't the sound from the ballroom," the orchestra leader said. "No," Phoebe replied, "but it suggests the fitting does more than protect the wood." She let go at once. "It shouldn't be opened until the maker is present." Crowther agreed. He noted the workshop mark stamped near the lower edge, a small device resembling a crowned awl. No one recognized it. The staff was placed on a linen-covered table within sight of all present. "Now the music," Phoebe said. The orchestra leader distributed the printed parts used for the quadrille. Phoebe compared them with the figure she had drawn from memory. The lawful sequence contained no added passage. Chairs were arranged to represent the couples. The musicians played the figure as written. Phoebe moved among the chairs, naming each change. At the proper cadence, the marked dancer remained near the center, visible to her chaperone. "Now repeat the phrase after the second change," Phoebe said. 16 bars, no more. The altered music began. Phoebe shifted the chairs in time with the repeated phrase. One pair moved outward, another crossed early. The marked position passed behind 2 couples and finished beside the western passage. The difference was not dramatic. That was what made it dangerous. A variation doesn't have to appear improper, Phoebe said. It only has to place one person where someone expects her to be. The appointed dance master folded his arms. "You can make chairs prove anything." "Then we won't use chairs." Phoebe turned toward Peregrine. He understood before she asked, "Where do you need me?" "Opposite me, at the head of the second line." Peregrine replaced his gloves with a clean pair suitable for dancing. Even an empty ballroom required propriety. Winifred moved to a chair beside the master of ceremonies. The doors remained open. Phoebe and Peregrine took their places. "You must follow my count," she said. "I won't anticipate." "You did once." His expression shifted. "At the opening ball." You waited for my hand before the first turn. I had a clear instruction. Then wait again. The musicians began the lawful figure. Phoebe counted beneath her breath, quietly enough that no one beyond Peregrine could hear every number. He adjusted to the rhythm of her breathing before she gave the first visible cue. When she paused, he paused. When she changed direction, he allowed the space to remain hers until she closed it. They completed the lawful sequence in the center. Again, Phoebe said, with the repeated bars. At the second change, the extra phrase entered. Phoebe guided Peregrine through the altered crossing. His shoulder angle was half a turn too narrow, which would place them beside the wrong chair. "May I adjust your sleeve?" she asked. "You may." Her fingers touched the cloth above his forearm and shifted him no more than an inch. The contact was brief, professional, and unexpectedly intimate in the empty room. Peregrine looked down at where her hand had been, then back at her face. Was that the error? It was the difference between the salon door and the pillar. A costly inch. Most dangerous. Arrangements depend upon people believing inches don't matter. He smiled then, with a warmth so unguarded that Phoebe nearly missed the next count. She recovered before the phrase ended. They finished beside the West Passage. The orchestra stopped. Peregrine looked toward the chaperones' chairs. "From there, Mrs. Dunsmore couldn't see your face, nor could I see hers, and anyone waiting in the passage would know when we arrived." A voice came from the entrance, or the musicians indulged a fashionable variation, and Miss Dunsmore has built a conspiracy from bad timing. Dominic Haverstock entered with his hat beneath one arm. He had not been listed among the witnesses. The master of ceremonies stiffened. "This is a closed inspection, Mr. Haverstock. I came on committee business." Dominic's gaze settled on Phoebe and Peregrine beside the passage. "Though I see the rehearsal has become private." Phoebe stepped away before the remark could claim significance. A private rehearsal wouldn't include my aunt, a solicitor, the master of ceremonies, an orchestra, and the man who directed the figure. Dominic approached the table. Crowther moved between him and the staff. "You won't touch it. It belongs to the committee. It remains under the master of ceremonies' authority," Crowther said. Phoebe lifted the lawful music. If the extra bars were fashionable, why do they always end beside the same retiring room? "Always?" Dominic asked. "You have one evening, and a figure that produces the same result when repeated, because you arranged it to do so. Then the printed parts should support you." The orchestra leader raised the sheets. "They don't." Dominic's gaze flickered toward the workshop mark. Crowther saw it. "You recognize that device." "I recognize many Bath craftsmen's marks. Name this one." Dominic did not answer. The silence proved neither guilt nor innocence, and Crowther did not pretend otherwise. He copied the mark and asked the master of ceremonies to sign the sketch. The staff was wrapped in fresh linen, tied with cord, and returned to the cabinet. The steward locked it. Crowther fixed a paper strip across the doors and sealed one end, while the master of ceremonies sealed the other. Before leaving, Crowther sent a clerk with the copied mark to the Bath tradesmen's registry. The reply reached Mrs. Dunsmore's house shortly after dusk. The crowned awl belonged to a small workshop in Walcott. Its proprietor remembered fitting a concealed pressure piece beneath a brass ferrule to sharpen a double signal. The order had been entered under two initials. D.H. By noon on the 26th of October, the pump room had turned Phoebe Dunsmore's name into an entertainment. Conversations softened when she approached, and revived after she passed. A mother, who had employed her for 2 seasons, stood beside the musicians' gallery. With a leather lesson book clasped against her reticule, her daughter watched Phoebe, with apology already gathering in her eyes. "Miss Dunsmore," the mother said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "we won't require Tuesday's lesson." Phoebe accepted the book. Inside lay the girls' copied exercises, each correction written in Phoebe's hand. "Of course, Mrs. Harbury, I'll return the unused portion of your fee." "That won't be necessary. It is necessary if the lessons are ended at your request." Mrs. Harbury's colour rose. She had expected protest, perhaps gratitude for being spared open insult. Phoebe gave her neither. The girl looked back as her mother led her away. Another woman turned her shoulder before Phoebe could offer a greeting. The refusals were small, almost elegant. That was how respectable cruelty preferred to travel. Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore came to Phoebe's side. "You needn't remain. If I leave now, they'll decide shame sent me. And if you stay, they'll have to watch me stand." Lady Minerva Haverstock approached, in black silk, using her cane more as a symbol of authority than support. Mr. Dominic Haverstock followed half a pace behind her. "Miss Dunsmore," Minerva said, "Bath has rarely discussed an instructor with such enthusiasm. Bath has generous leisure, and you've given it a novelty. A woman who counts steps now claims to understand the private conduct of families above her station." Phoebe held the returned lesson book against her skirt. "I claimed that 16 additional bars moved Miss Penrose toward an unobserved passage. You claim a great deal from music, only what the floor demonstrated." Dominic smiled. "A floor can't object when a clever woman arranges the chairs." The orchestra repeated the figure. His Grace and I finished where the added bars placed us. "Beside a private room," Minerva said, "a memorable position for an unmarried instructor seeking notice." The insult was shaped carefully enough to sound like concern. Phoebe saw several faces turn. "I teach young women how to enter rooms safely," she said. "I won't apologize for noticing when a room has been arranged to make one of them unsafe. And yet you've made yourself central to the danger." "No, someone marked Miss Penrose before I crossed the floor." Minerva's fingers tightened upon her cane. "A copper ornament is not a conspiracy. Then no one should fear an inquiry into who placed it." Silence gathered within the nearest circle. Lady Minerva's control depended upon making every objection appear vulgar, and Phoebe's composure denied her that advantage. "You're a woman who counts steps," Minerva said, "nothing more. Counting is how one notices when a girl is being moved somewhere she did not choose." Peregrine's arrival changed the room before anyone announced him. He entered beside the Master of Ceremonies and Mr. Elias Crowther. His gaze passed over Phoebe, the lesson book in her hand, Mrs. Harbury retreating, and Lady Minerva, standing close enough to dominate the exchange. Anger entered his face, but he did not use it to speak for Phoebe. He addressed the Master of Ceremonies instead. "You wished to ask Miss Dunsmore about the rehearsal." The older gentleman bowed to her. "The subscription committee proposes a limited rehearsal on the 4th of November. Selected families, the orchestra, and 2 patronesses will attend. We would value your examination of the quadrille under controlled conditions." Phoebe looked at Peregrine. He had the power to tell the room she was right. Instead, he had brought the authority capable of recognizing her work. "Under whose name will the findings be entered?" she asked. "The committee record." The Master of Ceremonies replied. "That isn't what I asked." Peregrine's eyes held hers. "Every observation must be entered under the name of Miss Phoebe Dunsmore," he said. "Not as my conclusion, and not as a favour granted by House Haverstock. He repeated her earlier condition without changing its meaning. Something in Phoebe's chest eased, though she allowed no softness into her posture. Then I'll attend. My aunt will remain with me. The directing staff will stay in the steward's cabinet until the witnesses assemble. No alteration will be made to the printed parts before I see them. The master of ceremonies agreed. Minerva turned to Peregrine. You would place a private instructor above the judgment of your own family? I would place an observation under the name of the person who made it. Family rank can't change where 16 bars leave a dancer. Dominic's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes moved toward Crowther. And the workshop? The proprietor remembers the initials, Crowther said. He hasn't yet opened the old order book before witnesses. He has agreed to do so within the week. For the first time, Dominic's composure thinned. It lasted no longer than a breath, but Phoebe saw it. So did Peregrine. Minerva recovered for them both. Old tradesmen remember what important gentlemen pay them to remember. Then the book will matter more than memory, Phoebe said. Minerva gave her a look stripped of social warmth. You should take care, Miss Dunsmore. A woman who insists upon standing in the centre may discover why others preferred to leave her at the edge. I've spent years at the edge, Phoebe replied. It gave me an excellent view. Minerva departed with Dominic beside her. The room resumed its murmur, but its tone had changed. Phoebe had not been defended into silence. She had been given authority in her own name. Peregrine remained several feet away. He did not offer praise, and she was grateful for it. Their eyes met. In the stillness between them, she understood that he remembered not only her condition, but why it mattered. Miss Lydia Penrose approached a few minutes later with her aunt. The girl's face was pale. May I speak with you? Winifred moved with them toward a window alcove, while Lydia's aunt stood near enough to satisfy propriety. The copper rosette at the ball wasn't on my card when we left home, Lydia said. Lady Minerva's maid pinned it there after we arrived. She said it marked me for a favoured position. Did your mother see? She said I mustn't embarrass Lady Minerva by refusing. Lydia twisted one glove finger in the other hand. It wasn't the first time. At a private assembly in the spring, Lady Minerva told me to wait near the West Salon after the second set. She said a gentleman wished to speak to my aunt. My aunt called me away before I went. Who was the gentleman? I don't know. Mamma hoped it was one of Mr. Haverstock's friends. Would you repeat this before Mr. Crowther? Not yet. Mamma will say I misunderstood. Then I won't speak for you, Phoebe said. But I won't pretend you said nothing. Relief and fear crossed Lydia's face together. Beyond the alcove, Lady Minerva's maid stood near the outer doors with a shallow pasteboard box beneath her arm. The lid had shifted. Inside, against white tissue, lay a row of copper rosettes. Before Phoebe could call Crowther, Dominic returned and spoke to the maid. He saw where Phoebe was looking. The lid closed at once. He took the box and carried it toward the vestibule. The distance and moving guests prevented any lawful attempt to seize committee property. Phoebe watched him disappear. The old order book would be opened within days. Until then, Dominic still controlled the objects, witnesses, and rooms that could turn expertise into scandal. The rehearsal on the 4th of November was no longer merely an examination. It was the last evening he possessed in which he might make Phoebe's knowledge look like guilt. Rain had darkened the road to Walcott by the time the carriage stopped before Mr. Amos Reed's narrow brick house on the morning of the 29th October. Phoebe descended beside Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore while Mr. Elias Crowther followed with a leather portfolio beneath his arm. Peregrine stepped down last. Before any of them reached the door, it opened a hand's breadth. An old man looked through the gap, saw the Duke, and began to close it again. "Mr. Reed," Crowther called. "You asked for written assurance before speaking." "I've brought it." The door paused. "I didn't ask for his grace." "Then you needn't receive me," Peregrine said. He remained on the wet pavement, instead of using his rank to cross the threshold. Amos studied him through the narrowing space. Age had drawn his shoulders forward, but his eyes were clear. "Your father would have entered anyway." "Then let me improve upon him." The answer held no pride. After a long silence, Amos opened the door. "You may come in, but I'll speak in my own order." "As you choose," Crowther said. The parlour was modest and carefully kept. 3 brass candlesticks stood upon the mantel. Amos took them down and placed them on the table before anyone sat. Crowther handed him the written assurance confirming that his pension would be paid independently of any office controlled by Dominic Haverstock. Amos read the first page twice. "This doesn't depend on what I say." "It doesn't," Crowther replied, "nor on whether your memory pleases his grace." Amos folded the paper with unsteady care. "Then I'll show you where everyone stood." He set the 3 candlesticks in a line. These were the wall lights in the west passage. The first near the ballroom doors, the second beside the salon, the third before the green baize door to the service stair. A chair became the salon entrance. A folded hearth rug marked the turn of the stair. Phoebe watched him rebuild the corridor through objects a servant might have carried every day. "Where were you ordered to stand?" she asked. Amos placed 2 fingers beside the second candlestick. "Here, we were meant to be visible. A footman in sight keeps foolishness from beginning, or keeps people honest when it ends." "Who changed that arrangement?" Crowther asked. Amos looked at Peregrine and then at the paper securing his pension. "Lady Minerva. She said the ladies required privacy, and no servant was to overhear what didn't concern him." "Was that usual?" Phoebe asked. "No, miss. Private patroness meetings happened before guests arrived, not while young women were dancing." He moved the chair slightly inward. "That night, Lady Alice came through this door with a young lady in pale yellow. The girl was crying. Her ribbon had torn at one shoulder. Lady Alice told me to fetch the girl's aunt and keep anyone else away." Peregrine's breath altered, but he did not interrupt. "Did you know the young woman?" "No, I only knew she was frightened and trying not to show it." Amos placed one hand near the first candlestick. "Mr. Dominic came down the passage. Lady Alice said she would go to the master of ceremonies. He told her she would ruin women who had already survived. She said silence wasn't survival if someone could sell it again." Phoebe felt the words settle over the small room. "What happened next?" "Lady Minerva arrived and ordered me below stairs." Shame crossed Amos's face. I obeyed as far as the turning. He touched the edge of the folded rug. "I should gone farther or come back sooner." "I did neither." "Tell us only what you heard," Phoebe said. "Nothing more." Amos nodded. "I heard the corridor bolt slide, then voices, not clear words. A few minutes later, something struck the stair below. A heavy sound. When I returned, Mr. Dominic came through the green door. His cuff was torn. Lady Minerva was behind him. Peregrine had gone pale. "Did you see Alice fall?" "No, Your Grace." Amos met his eyes. "I won't say I did." "Did you see Dominic touch her?" "No." "Then what can you swear to?" "That Lady Alice brought out a frightened woman, that Mr. Dominic followed her, that Lady Minerva cleared the corridor, that I heard the bolt and afterward the fall." that Mr. Dominic returned through the service door with a torn cuff, and that Lady Minerva told me before anyone questioned me that Lady Alice had fled from her brother in distress. The limits did not weaken the testimony. They gave it weight. Amos moved the candlesticks back to the mantel, then took the chair away. There was something else, the directing staff. "You saw it that night?" Crowther asked. "Not clearly. I saw it the next morning. Plain beechwood, no brass ferrule that I remember. The steward gave it to a workshop man. It returned by the following afternoon with the metal fitting. Lady Minerva told the steward to enter it as a repair." Phoebe glanced at Peregrine. "Then the double signal existed before the brass ferrule." "It could have been made by hand," Amos said. "2 taps are easy. The new fitting only made them sharper above the music." "So the mechanism refined an older method," Crowther said. "It didn't create it." Amos nodded. "That's all I know." He hesitated, then reached into a small drawer and removed a blank scrap covered with old household sums. "My wife used the back of the card years ago. The message is gone, but I remember the initials on the front. A.K. The young lady sent it one Christmas. She thanked me for finding her aunt." Crowther examined the scrap but did not treat it as surviving evidence. "The initials are memory only. We can still search the old subscription lists and lodging books." "Families who left Bath suddenly after that assembly," Phoebe added, "and any Arabella, Anne, Amelia, or other A, whose surname began with K. Crowther, closed his portfolio. I'll begin today." When they rose to leave, Peregrine remained before Amos. "I questioned gentlemen, because I believed rank made their accounts reliable." Amos' mouth tightened. Servants were expected to remember only what families found useful. "Alice looked below the hierarchy for truth," Peregrine said. "I looked only toward men who shared my name. You were grieving. Grief explains the blindness. It doesn't excuse it." Outside, the rain had weakened to mist. Crowther and Winifred walked ahead toward the carriage, leaving Phoebe and Peregrine beneath the narrow awning. He looked toward the wet street rather than at her. "Every new fact changes Alice," he said. "Not who she was, who I allowed myself to believe she was. Then believe what the evidence permits now. That she was braver than I was. That she listened where you did not." He turned to Phoebe, his hand open between them, palm upward, but he did not reach. "May I offer you my hand?" She looked at the space he had left for refusal. "Why? Not as gratitude, not as a command." His voice lowered. "Because I don't trust myself to carry this without turning grief into anger, and your presence reminds me that purpose is quieter." Phoebe placed her gloved hand in his. Peregrine did not close his fingers at once. He waited until her hand settled fully against his palm. Only then did his fingers curve gently around hers. The contact held no claim, yet it carried more honesty than any practiced declaration could have done. "Let it become purpose," she said. "Not punishment. I'll try." "No, you'll choose." His gaze steadied. "Then I choose." Phoebe allowed one quiet breath between them before withdrawing. He released her immediately. As they entered the carriage, Crowther opened his notebook. "A.K. gives us a direction, not an identity." Peregrine looked once toward the house, where a servant had kept 6 years of truth, inside the position of 3 candles. Somewhere in Bath, a woman who had survived the West Salon might still remember why Alice had died trying to keep another door open. Mrs. Arabella Kenton refused to let the Duke of Westerdale enter her drawing-room. On the first morning of November, Peregrine stood in the passage of her Queen Square house beside Mr. Elias Crowther while a maid held the door open no wider than courtesy required. His Grace, the maid began, then faltered beneath Arabella's correction from within. His Grace may wait in the adjoining room. Peregrine did not argue. Of course. Phoebe entered with Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore and found Arabella standing beside a small escritoire. She was perhaps 40, dressed in dove-colored wool, with a narrow gold wedding band and an expression too composed to be mistaken for ease. The connecting doors between the drawing-room and the adjoining parlour remained open. Peregrine and Crowther could hear if Arabella chose to speak loudly, but neither could see more than the edge of the carpet. The arrangement belonged to Arabella, and that was why she had agreed to receive them. Mr. Crowther found your name through the subscription lists, Phoebe said. He matched the initials A.K. to a family that left Bath after the Assembly in November 1811. A later lodging record gave your married name. Arabella's fingers rested on the escritoire key. Then Mr. Reed remembered. Only the initials, and that you thanked him for finding your aunt. He did more than that. Arabella looked toward the open doorway, where Peregrine remained out of sight. He was the only man in the passage who treated my fear as a fact. Winifred sat after Arabella indicated a chair. Phoebe waited until Arabella gave a faint nod. You teach girls to enter rooms. I teach them to know where they're standing. That may be more useful. Arabella unlocked the escritoire and removed a folded note, yellowed at the edges, but intact. She did not hand it over. She opened it and placed it upon the desk where Phoebe could read without touching. The elegantly written message contained no names, only a warning disguised as care. Discretion will preserve every lady concerned. Further mention of the West Salon will oblige others to defend what cannot be proved. Phoebe looked up. Lady Minerva wrote this. I watched her write 3 invitations that week. I knew the hand. Did anyone else see it arrive? My father. He called it mercy. Arabella refolded the paper. I called it proof that they knew I had something to fear. She crossed to the hearth, but did not sit. I was 19. My father had brought me to Bath because 3 poor harvests had left our estate burdened. He hoped a respectable marriage might repair what land had not. At the assembly, Lady Minerva's maid pinned a copper rosette to my card and said I had been selected for a favoured position. Did the quadrille change? Phoebe asked. After 2 sharp taps, the music repeated. I was passed from one gentleman to another until I couldn't see my aunt. 16 bars. I didn't know how to count them then. I remember the phrase repeated exactly once. What brought you to the salon? A maid said my aunt had fainted. Arabella's mouth tightened. The message was false. The West Salon was empty when I entered. The door closed behind me, and I heard the corridor bolt slide. Winifred drew a slow breath. Who came in? A gentleman through the service door. He was younger than my father, older than I was, and frightened almost beyond speech. One of Mr. Dominic Haverstock's associates held his debts. He had been promised they would be forgiven if my family accepted an engagement. Did he threaten you? Phoebe asked. No. He begged me to understand that he had no choice. Men say that when they mean a woman must surrender hers. Arabella looked directly at Phoebe. We remained apart. We argued. Then the outer door opened. Lady Minerva stood there with Dominic, 2 patronesses, and my aunt. They had arrived too quickly to be surprised. What were you offered? An engagement or silence purchased with money. My father paid. The sum passed through the subscription committee as a settlement of dispute. We left Bath within the week. And the engagement? Dissolved once the payment was made. The suspicion remained. Arabella's gaze shifted toward the open doorway. Lady Alice found me before the witnesses entered. She came through the service passage after hearing the bolt. She sent the gentleman away and stood beside me when the salon door opened. Lady Minerva said Alice has misunderstood a private meeting. Alice asked why private meetings required marked cards, repeated music, and doors fastened from the outside. Phoebe pictured Alice standing between a frightened girl and those prepared to name her guilty. Did Alice ask to use your name? No, I begged her not to, she said. Your story belongs to you. The method belongs to every woman it may harm. She intended to go to the master of ceremonies that night. Arabella closed her eyes for one brief moment. I left before she died. Phoebe did not tell her the guilt was unreasonable. Guilt rarely loosened because another person called it so. Would you like Peregrine to hear the rest from you? She asked. Arabella considered the question. Then she crossed to the connecting doors. Your Grace, you may come in now. Peregrine entered without haste. Crowther remained behind until Arabella nodded to him as well. Peregrine stopped several feet from her. Mrs. Kenton, I've told Miss Dunsmore what happened. I won't tell it again for your grief. I won't ask you to. Then, what will you ask? What protection you want and what you don't? She studied him before replying. My husband's letters have nothing to do with this. They remain private. My name is not to be spoken publicly unless I agree. If I give Mr. Crowther Lady Minerva's note, it is to be opened only under those conditions. Peregrine looked to Crowther to ensure the terms could be secured. They can, Crowther said. I'll write them now. He prepared a receipt and read each condition aloud. Arabella corrected one phrase so that consent could not be implied by silence. Crowther amended it. She then placed the original note into the envelope herself. Crowther sealed it before all present, marked the date, and gave Arabella the signed receipt. Alice listened to you, Peregrine said. She did. I'm sorry that my family made survival another form of payment. Arabella's gaze remained steady. Be sorry in public when it costs you something. I will. As Phoebe turned to leave, Arabella caught her sleeve lightly. Lady Minerva knows what you've seen. She won't let you reach another public assembly unmarked. The warning followed them into the carriage. Crowther and Winifred sat opposite. Peregrine looked through the window as Queen Square passed beneath a pale sky. Alice listened without taking possession of the story, he said. I thought protection meant deciding what happened next. You can choose differently. I intend to. Phoebe placed her hand palm upward on the seat between them. Peregrine looked at it, then at her face. He waited. When she gave the smallest nod, he placed his hand in hers. His fingers closed gently, without drawing her nearer. The carriage turned, and their joined hands shifted with it, but did not separate. You don't have to carry her last act alone, Phoebe said, nor do you have to carry every woman she couldn't reach. No, but I can refuse to look away. They remained hand in hand until the carriage stopped before Mrs. Dunsmore's house. Peregrine released her only after she moved to withdraw. A servant met them at the door with a note delivered from the Penrose residence. Lydia had received an invitation to the rehearsal on the 4th November. Beside her name, in the same elegant hand Phoebe had seen upon Arabella's note, appeared 5 words, favoured placement in second figure. By the evening of the 4th of November, the Bath upper rooms had been arranged for a rehearsal that looked private enough to be harmless and public enough to destroy a reputation. Fewer chandeliers were lit than at a subscription ball. 2 patronesses occupied the raised seats, selected families lined the walls, and the orchestra waited beneath the gallery. Mr. Elias Crowther inspected the seals upon the steward's cabinet with the Master of Ceremonies before the beechwood directing staff was released to the appointed dance master. Its brass ferrule caught the candlelight. Phoebe stood beside Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore and understood why Dominic had chosen this room and this night. The workshop proprietor had not yet opened his old order book before witnesses. If Phoebe could be made to appear as the architect of the danger she had described, every later discovery might be called an invention designed to secure the Duke's attention. Lydia Penrose entered with her mother and aunt shortly before the second figure. A copper rosette had already been pinned to the corner of her card. Phoebe saw it at once. Lydia saw Phoebe see it, and fear stripped the practiced calm from her face. Lady Minerva's maid put it there, she whispered when Phoebe reached her. Mamma said I mustn't refuse a favoured place. Did anyone else see? My aunt saw the maid near me, but not the pin. Phoebe looked toward the benches. Mrs. Penrose was speaking eagerly with one of Dominic's friends. Lydia's aunt had been placed several chairs away. Winifred came close enough to hear. "We can stop the quadrille," she said, "and mark Lydia before the room," Phoebe replied. "That's what they expect." She opened her fan to shield their hands. "Give me your card." Lydia obeyed. Phoebe unpinned the rosette, fixed it to her own card, and returned Lydia's unmarked card. Winifred watched every movement. "Stay beside your aunt until I tell you otherwise," Phoebe said. Lydia stared at the copper ornament now resting against Phoebe's name. "You know what they'll do. I know what they intend. That isn't the same as safety." "No." Phoebe closed the fan. "But it's a choice." The quadrille formed. Phoebe accepted the assigned hand of a respectable widower, while Peregrine stood near the western side with Crowther and the Master of Ceremonies. His gaze found the rosette on Phoebe's card. Concern sharpened his face. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. The appointed dance master lifted the staff. One tap guided the proper change. Then came the second click. 16 additional bars entered beneath the violins. Phoebe counted them. Her first partner passed her onward. A second gentleman received her too early and turned her west. The motion remained graceful, which made resistance appear clumsy. At the next crossing, one of Dominic's associates took her hand without waiting for the lawful exchange. A little farther, Miss Dunsmore. The figure ends in the center, not for a favored position. He guided her toward the passage. Phoebe allowed the route to complete. She needed to know whether the same mark could carry a different woman to the same door. At the final cadence, she stood within a few steps of the west salon. Lady Minerva's maid appeared in the passage, breathless and pale by design. "Miss Dunsmore, Miss Penrose has fainted. She's in the salon." Phoebe looked toward Lydia's assigned place. Moving couples blocked the view. The message was almost certainly false. So had Arabella's been. That was precisely why Phoebe could not pretend not to hear it. She left the floor and entered the passage. The maid opened the west salon. "She's just inside." Phoebe crossed the threshold, but stopped near the door. The room was empty. The door closed behind her. A bolt slid from the corridor side with a hard metallic sound. Phoebe tried the handle once. It did not move. Across the salon, the service door opened and Dominic entered. He wore evening black and an expression of regret polished for witnesses. "You've been very diligent," he said. Phoebe moved behind a long table, keeping its full width between them. "Open the door. I didn't bolt it. Then call the person who did. And spoil the lesson?" His gaze dropped to the copper rosette on her card. "By tomorrow, Bath will understand that you recognized every signal because you arranged them. You changed Miss Penrose's card. You followed the altered figure. You entered the salon after a message no sensible woman would believe. You needed to act before the workshop book was opened. A flicker crossed his face. Books record payments, not purpose. Rooms do the same. They record where people are placed. Dominic stepped no closer than the edge of the carpet. Society won't count the distance between us. It'll remember a dance instructress alone with a gentleman after pursuing a duke. Society may remember what it chooses. The bolt remains outside. Voices sounded in the passage, approaching with suspicious speed. Dominic lowered his gaze as though accepting a burden. Marriage would repair most of this. Marriage can't turn confinement into consent. It can make the witnesses charitable. A door bolted from the outside cannot create a promise inside. The outer bolt lifted. The salon door opened upon Lady Minerva, 2 patronesses, Mrs. Penrose, several gentlemen, and Lydia's horrified aunt. Dominic stood on one side of the room. Phoebe stood on the other, the table between them. No improper act had occurred. The witnesses had not come to discover what happened. They had come to supply its meaning. Dominic bowed his head. "I'll do whatever honor requires." Phoebe walked toward the open threshold. Her right slipper caught against a small brass burr near the doorframe. The silver leaf pattern buckle scraped sharply but held. She did not stumble. The music stopped in the ballroom. Peregrine appeared behind the witnesses, his face controlled with visible effort. His gaze went first to Phoebe, then to Dominic, then to Lydia, who stood unharmed at the end of the passage. He had enough to understand why Phoebe had taken the rosette. "Step away from her," he told Dominic. "I haven't touched her. You won't speak to her again tonight." Peregrine turned to Crowther. "Secure the corridor. No fixture is to be altered." He ordered Lydia, returned to her aunt, and the appointed dance master separated from the committee witnesses. Then Phoebe stepped into the passage and faced the watching company. Miss Penrose was never in this room. The message was false. The rosette on my card had been placed on hers, and the quadrille carried the marked position here exactly as before. The door was bolted from. "Not here," Peregrine said. The words cut across hers. "Mrs. Dunsmore will take you to the withdrawing room. My carriage will return you home." Phoebe stared at him. The same people who saw that door open must hear what happened before they leave. "You've been placed in danger. Then let me name it. I won't permit another scene." There it was, the old instinct. Stop the music. Close the room. Remove the woman at the center of the truth. Peregrine offered his arm. Phoebe looked at it and then at him. No. Pain entered his eyes. He lowered his arm at once. "You closed the door on my voice before they could," she said. Winifred took her into the withdrawing room, where Crowther joined them under proper attendance. The copper rosette still rested on Phoebe's card. Winifred removed it with gloved fingers, while Crowther recorded the date, the source, and its condition. Phoebe stated that she had taken it from Lydia's card before the quadrille. Winifred signed as witness. Crowther placed the rosette in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote across the fastening. The card remained Phoebe's. The rosette went into Crowther's custody. By breakfast the next morning, a servant delivered the first returned lesson book. No letter accompanied it. None was needed. By the afternoon of the 5th of November, 3 lesson books lay upon Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore's drawing-room table. Each had been returned by a servant. None carried a proper letter. One contained a single folded banknote for unused instruction. placed between pages where Phoebe had corrected a pupil's posture. Another held a mother's calling card, turned face down. The third belonged to a girl who had once practiced every figure until her slippers wore thin. Her book had been tied shut with black ribbon, as though instruction itself had become something to mourn. Phoebe untied it, removed the fee she had not earned, and carefully prepared 3 receipts. "You needn't answer silence with perfect manners," Winifred said. "I'm not answering silence. I'm keeping my accounts." That morning, a patroness had passed Phoebe in the pump room and refused her greeting before 2 acquaintances. The insult had been quiet. Its purpose had not. Bath was teaching other women how to avoid Phoebe without appearing cruel. A second note arrived before luncheon. Lydia Penrose had written it in an uneven hand. "I'm sorry. If I hadn't worn the rosette, none of this would have happened to you." Phoebe answered at once. "You were marked because someone believed your obedience could be used." She read aloud to Winifred. "The guilt belongs to the person who chose the mark, not to the young woman expected to submit to it." She folded the reply. "Will Mrs. Penrose let her receive that?" "Her aunt will." A servant entered with another letter. This one had no signature. The hand was elegant and familiar. It offered Phoebe an annuity sufficient to replace her lost pupils if she withdrew from Bath before the next assembly. No admission would be required. No accusation would be repeated. Discretion, the writer promised, would allow every person concerned to recover from an unfortunate misunderstanding. Phoebe read the letter twice and placed it flat upon the table. Lady Minerva has learned that silence sounds kinder when it comes with income. Winifred's mouth hardened. "You won't accept it?" "No, but I won't destroy it either, Mr." Elias Crowther arrived within the hour. He compared the hand with the certified copy of Arabella Kenton's note, but made no formal conclusion. He copied the offer, recorded the paper, fold, seal, and delivery time, then asked the servant who had received it to describe the messenger. The man had worn no livery and had given no name. Crowther placed the envelope with the copy in his portfolio. Phoebe wrote her reply in 4 sentences. She declined the annuity. She declined to leave Bath. She declined to accept silence as evidence of discretion. She requested that any future proposal be signed. Crowther read the reply aloud before Phoebe sealed it. The original offer would be returned with her answer. The copy and envelope would remain with him. "She may claim she never wrote it," Winifred said. "Then her denial will become another fact to examine," Phoebe replied. Peregrine requested a call the next afternoon. He entered Mrs. Dunsmore's drawing room on the 6th of November, looking as though sleep had avoided him. He bowed to Winifred, then to Phoebe. No apology had yet been asked for, and none could be smuggled inside concern. "Mr. Crowther told me about the annuity," he said. "And my answer, yes. Then you know I won't leave Bath. I know you won't accept Lady Minerva's terms." Peregrine remained standing. "I'm asking you to consider mine." Phoebe waited. "Wardenham Park is beyond Dominic's reach," he said. "You and your aunt would have separate rooms, your own servants, and complete freedom within the estate. It would be temporary until this matter is exposed. And what would Bath see? That I removed you for your protection. Bath already saw that." Pain crossed his face. "This would be different. The rooms would be finer. That isn't what I mean. Lady Minerva offers money if I disappear. You offer a ducal estate if I disappear. Your intention is better. The result is the same." Peregrine crossed one step toward the fireplace, then stopped himself. "Dominic confined you in that room. Dominic arranged the room. Lady Minerva arranged the witnesses. You arranged my silence afterward. The words landed without raised voice. I was trying to keep you safe. You kept me from answering an accusation in the place where it was made. The company was hostile. Then that was the company that needed to hear me. His hands closed at his sides. Danger left me no alternative. Fear is not the same as necessity. The room went still. Peregrine looked toward the lesson books on the table. These were returned because of what I did. Because of what they did, and because you made their version easier to believe. He accepted the distinction. What must happen now? 3 things. Phoebe rose, leaving the table between them. The same room must hear a correction. The evidence must remain outside your household. Every witness must choose whether to speak. Agreed. Not yet. Hear all of it. He inclined his head. I'm listening. The correction comes before perfect proof. It must state that the salon door was bolted from the corridor, that Miss Penrose was unharmed elsewhere, and that my removal was not evidence of guilt. I'll sign it. The directing staff remains under the Master of Ceremonies and Mr. Crowther. Nothing goes to Wardenham. Agreed. Mrs. Kenton, Mr. Reed, Miss Penrose, and anyone else will decide what part of their account becomes public. Protection can't depend upon testimony. It won't. Phoebe looked directly at him. And the room must be reopened for a witnessed reconstruction. Peregrine went still. The West Salon. Yes, you ask me to reopen the place where Alice died. I ask you to stop allowing Lady Minerva to own its meaning. Grief tightened his features. His right hand moved as though he might reach across the table. It stopped before leaving his side. Phoebe saw the unfinished gesture and understood what it cost him not to convert feeling into possession. If the proof disgraces House Haverstock, he asked, truth doesn't become false because it embarrasses a duke. He breathed once, slowly. Then the room will reopen. Following once won't restore trust. I know, but it may begin. Peregrine bowed. He did not ask forgiveness. On the 7th of November, the Master of Ceremonies, Crowther, and the steward recorded the Beechwood staff's condition. Fresh cord was tied around its linen wrapping. Crowther placed one seal across the knot, and the Master of Ceremonies placed another. The staff remained in the steward's cabinet. A locksmith examined the west salon door and confirmed that the spring bolt could be thrown only from the corridor. He also recorded the brass burr near the threshold. Phoebe showed him the shallow scratch across the right silver leaf on her buckle, but she did not surrender it. The buckle remained on her slipper, where it belonged. Near dusk, Crowther brought the workshop proprietor's certified extract. The old order book did not speak of scandal, confinement, or marriage. Its entry was more careful than that. Improvement to directing staff for private figures. Payment had come from the subscription committee account administered by Dominic Haverstock. Phoebe read the line and handed it to Peregrine. For the first time since the investigation began, he did not tell her what the evidence required. He waited. Phoebe folded the copy. First the correction, she said. Then we make the room show what the words are trying to hide. On the morning of the 9th November, the Bath workshop proprietor entered the steward's room at the upper rooms carrying his order book and a narrow leather case of tools. Mr. Elias Crowther inspected the joint seals upon the cabinet with the Master of Ceremonies before either man broke them. Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore stood beside Phoebe. Peregrine remained near the window, restrained enough that his stillness seemed more deliberate than calm. The Beechwood directing staff was removed, its wrapping opened, and its condition compared with Crowther's earlier record. No mark had changed. No fitting had been replaced. The proprietor turned the brass ferrule with a fine tool and exposed a small spring set into the wood beneath it. "This sharpens the signal," he said. "One pressure gives a single click. 2 close pressures can be heard through music." He demonstrated. The sound carried cleanly across the room. Phoebe recognized the same double note that had altered the quadrille on opening night. Crowther placed the certified extract from the Audiobook beside the original entry. "Was this the first device used for that purpose?" he asked. "No," the proprietor replied. "There was an earlier wooden pressure piece. Cruder. It made 2 taps if handled properly, though the sound didn't carry as well. The brass ferrule was fitted later to conceal the spring and improve the signal." "Later than November 1811? Phoebe asked. "Yes, miss. The order came the day after Lady Alice Haverstock died." The answer reconciled Amos Reed's memory with Peregrine's. The double signal had existed on the night of Alice's death. The brass fitting had refined it afterward. "Who authorized the payment?" Crowther asked. The proprietor pointed to the committee notation. "The account was administered by Mr. Dominic Haverstock. I was shown his authorization." Peregrine's expression hardened, but he did not convert the evidence into a conclusion it could not yet bear. "The payment proves he approved the alteration," he said. "It does not by itself prove how the staff was used." Phoebe looked at him. Months earlier, perhaps even weeks earlier, he might have made the leap because grief required it. Now he stopped where the evidence stopped. "No," she said, "but it proves the mechanism wasn't imagined." Crowther recorded the proprietor's statement. The staff was wrapped again, tied, sealed by Crowther and the master of ceremonies, and returned to the steward's cabinet. By noon, Peregrine had completed a written correction addressed to the master of ceremonies and the patronesses who had attended the rehearsal. Crowther carried the signed copies. The statement did not ask society to trust the Duke's affection, anger, or family loyalty. It named what could already be proved. Miss Phoebe Dunsmore had taken the marked rosette from Miss Penrose's card. She had entered the West Salon after receiving a false message. Miss Penrose had remained unharmed elsewhere. The salon door had been bolted from the corridor. Phoebe had been standing apart from Dominic when the door opened. Most importantly, Peregrine stated that his order removing her from the assembly must not be treated as evidence of guilt. At 3:00, he called at Mrs. Dunsmore's house. Winifred remained beside the tea table while Phoebe received him. 3 returned lesson books still stood upon a side table, not displayed as accusation, but not hidden. Peregrine saw them. "The correction has been delivered," he said. "Mr." Crowther told me. "It names the bolt, the false message, Miss Penrose's safety, and the rosette exchange. That was necessary." "Yes." Peregrine sat only after Winifred indicated the chair. "But necessity isn't why I'm here." Phoebe folded her hands in her lap. "Then why are you here?" He did not begin with Dominic or Lady Minerva. He gave himself no shield. "At the rehearsal, I saw you in that room and stopped seeing what was actually before me. I saw the Western Passage, Dominic, and the same faces that had watched Alice disappear. I believed that if I controlled the doors, the witnesses, and your departure, I could prevent the past from happening again. You prevented me from speaking." "I did." His answer came without qualification. "I turned fear into authority. I treated your silence as protection, and in doing so I made it useful to the people who arranged the scandal." Phoebe watched him closely. "You knew Lydia was safe?" "Yes." "You knew I had taken the rosette from her?" "Yes." You saw the distance between Dominic and me. I did. Yet you decided that your judgment mattered more than my account. Peregrine held her gaze. Yes, the admission cost him. That was why it mattered. I had no right to decide your public absence. I should have secured the corridor, separated Dominic from you, and stood beside you while you addressed the same company. Instead, I repeated the failure I have spent 6 years pretending to punish. Phoebe's fingers tightened once. You said you would not permit another scene. I called your truth a scene because I was afraid of what the room might do with it. And what did the room do with your silence? It used it to condemn you. He looked toward the lesson books. Those are part of the harm I caused. Part of it. I know. His voice lowered. I'm sorry, Phoebe. It was the first time he had spoken her name without title. He did not use the intimacy to soften what followed. The correction will remain whether you forgive me or not. The investigation will continue whether you allow me near you or not. Your public name will not depend upon what becomes of us. Phoebe let the silence remain. Why didn't you write that you believed me? Because the statement concerns what can be established, the external bolt, Miss Penrose's location, Mrs. Dunsmore's witness, the distance within the salon. I would not let anyone dismiss those facts as the judgment of a man attached to you. Her breath caught at the last phrase, but she did not allow it to redirect the question, and privately, Peregrine answered without hesitation. Privately, I believe you. Will you still reopen the upper rooms if the evidence disgraces House Haverstock? Yes. If Dominic's financial dealings become public? Yes. If Lady Minerva's position in Bath is destroyed? Pain touched his expression. Yes. If no evidence can prove exactly how Alice fell? He closed his eyes for one brief moment. Then I will not force certainty because grief prefers it. That answer reached the place his apology had been trying to find. Phoebe rose. Peregrine stood immediately, but he did not come toward her. Winifred turned slightly toward the window without leaving the room. Phoebe crossed the distance herself. She placed one hand against Peregrine's chest over the steady beat beneath his coat. Surprise entered his face. He remained still. Following once doesn't restore trust, she said. No, a correction doesn't erase what happened. No, but you named the harm without asking me to comfort you. His voice softened. I won't ask. Phoebe stepped closer. Only when she leaned into him did Peregrine raise his arms. He held her carefully at first, waiting even within the embrace. She rested her cheek against his chest and let her hand remain over his heart. Then his arms closed more securely around her, not as possession, but as shelter she had chosen. He did not kiss her. He did not turn apology into courtship or ask forgiveness because she had permitted tenderness. I won't use this moment to ask for hope, he said. Good, though I have it. Phoebe closed her eyes for one breath. Hope has never required permission. When she stepped back, he released her at once. The trust between them had not been restored, but it had been given a place to return. A knock sounded below. Minutes later, Crowther entered with a note from the orchestra leader. 2 musicians had been offered money by an agent connected to Dominic Haverstock. In exchange, they were to swear that Phoebe had instructed them to add the 16 bars and had invented the double signal herself. Peregrine looked at Phoebe, but he did not tell her what must happen next. He waited. She saw the question and answered it. Find the original parts, she said. Then let the music prove who altered it. The first threat reached Mrs. Arabella Kenton on the 12th November, folded inside an envelope that bore no seal and no sender's name. If she spoke publicly, it warned, Private letters from her marriage would be copied and circulated through Bath. Before noon, Mr. Amos Reed received a different offer. 50 guineas and a cottage outside the city would be his if he left before the next subscription assembly. Mr. Elias Crowther recorded both approaches, but Phoebe refused to let urgency become another form of coercion. "Mrs. Kenton decides what she'll risk," she said in Mrs. Dunsmore's drawing room. "Mr. Reed does too." Peregrine stood near the mantel, his expression hard with restrained anger. "I can place guards at both houses." "You can offer them," Phoebe replied. "You can't make protection depend upon testimony." He accepted the distinction. Arabella chose to speak only about the rosette, the altered music, the West Salon, and Lady Minerva's note. Her unrelated letters would remain private. Amos chose to stay after Crowther reminded him that his pension had already been secured beyond Dominic's influence. He returned the 50-guinea offer through the solicitor without naming courage as the reason. "I'm tired of being moved," he said. The discovery that changed the inquiry came from the orchestra leader. On the afternoon of the 13th of November, he opened a locked folio in the upper rooms before Crowther, the master of ceremonies, Phoebe, Winifred, and Peregrine. Beneath 2 ordinary country dance arrangements lay the first violin part used for the disputed quadrille. 16 bars had been inserted between the second change and the final return. The ink was slightly darker than the surrounding notation, and the handwriting did not match the copyist's. The orchestra leader stared at it as though the page had accused him. "Mr. Haverstock paid for the alteration," he said. He called it a fashionable variation. He said the patronesses wanted favoured dancers guided west for private introductions. "Did Miss Dunsmore ever instruct you to add those bars?" Crowther asked. "No," she asked what had already been played. "And the 2 musicians who were offered money?" "They've refused. They'll say so if required." Crowther did not remove the music until a receipt had been prepared and signed. The part was placed in a folio case, sealed, and entered into his custody. The remaining accounts did not confess anything so plainly. That made them more believable. A locksmith's charge from 1811 read alteration to West retiring room. A workshop payment recorded improvement to directing staff for private figures. Musicians received several gratuities after selected assemblies. Other sums appeared as settlement of subscription dispute. Phoebe and Crowther matched the dates against Arabella's payment, 2 abrupt engagements named in old society notices, and the night Alice died. No single entry proved extortion. Together, they showed that the same committee paid for the music, the staff, the room, and the silence that followed. The old notices did not name shame. One announced that a young lady had withdrawn because of delicate health. Another praised a sudden understanding between families. Phoebe laid those polite phrases beside the committee dates and saw how thoroughly cruelty could dress itself as discretion. Peregrine read the same pages without speaking. His fingers tightened upon the table, then loosened. He did not demand Dominic's arrest or force a conclusion ahead of proof. "Alice saw the pattern before any of us wanted to name it," he said, "and Dominic's learned that respectable language can hide the price. Then we'll make every harmless phrase answer to its date," Phoebe replied. The master of ceremonies then brought out an archived arrangement of the upper rooms from 1811. It marked the appointed dance master's position, the fixed music stand, the chaperones' benches, the West Salon, and the green baize service door. Phoebe studied the sightlines. "Keep this with the supporting records," she said. If anyone claims to have seen the signal from the wrong position, the room itself may contradict him. On the 14th November, the West Salon corridor was closed for the removal of the original spring bolt. The locksmith worked before Crowther, the master of ceremonies, one neutral patroness, Phoebe, Winifred, and Peregrine. He sketched the screw positions before touching them. He recorded the brass burr that had scraped Phoebe's right buckle and confirmed again that the bolt could be thrown only from the corridor. When it was removed, the exposed screw holes looked ordinary. Phoebe found that more disturbing than any sinister device. Nothing about the wood announced what the bolt had allowed people to do. Peregrine stood behind the witnesses rather than beside the locksmith, giving Phoebe the clearest view. When the mechanism came free, his breath caught once. He looked toward the service passage, but he did not close it or order anyone away. Crowther placed the original mechanism in a small wooden box, wrapped it, and fixed his seal across the fastening. The master of ceremonies added a second seal. An ordinary internal latch was fitted to the salon door, and the room was not to be used privately before the examination. The original bolt won't be operated again, the locksmith said. I can make a working model for demonstration. Do that, Phoebe replied. The original should be shown, not handled beyond necessity. By late afternoon, chairs marked the dancers' positions upon the ballroom floor. Phoebe explained the order of the reconstruction. The lawful quadrille would be played first. The altered part would follow. A comparison rosette from the remaining committee packet would identify a consenting volunteer. The original rosette, sealed after the rehearsal, would remain untouched. Peregrine studied the arrangement. A male dance master might lead the figure, he said. The room may be less inclined to call the demonstration personal. Phoebe looked at him. He heard the error before she answered. You'd replace the woman who discovered the method with a man society finds easier to believe. Peregrine's jaw tightened. Yes, I would. He did not defend the instinct. Then I shall follow your count. She indicated his position at the head of the second line. Stand there. The orchestra leader raised his bow. Peregrine came opposite her and offered his hand, but he did not assume the distance. Is this acceptable? Not yet. Phoebe placed her gloved hand in his and moved one measured step closer. His other hand hovered where the figure required it. Higher, she said. He adjusted without touching her waist. Like this? Yes. The music began. They entered the lawful pattern. At the first crossing, Peregrine corrected his shoulder before Phoebe could prompt him, opening the exact space she had taught him to preserve in the empty ballroom. She looked up. You remembered. I remember what matters. The words were quiet enough for her alone. Warmth moved through her, but she kept the count. When the repeated phrase began, she guided him through the altered route. He did not anticipate. He waited for the pressure of her fingers, changed direction when she asked, and stopped beside the western passage at the 16th bar. Their hands remained joined only until the figure ended. Phoebe released him first. The room will see the route, Peregrine said, only if it agrees to look before it decides what it means. Then we'll make the order impossible to confuse. A footman entered with a note for the master of ceremonies. Lady Minerva confirmed that she would attend the extraordinary meeting on the 20th November. She would bring a former assistant to the dance master, a man prepared to swear that Phoebe had invented the double signal and directed the musicians herself. Peregrine handed the note to Phoebe. She's placing a lie beside the evidence and trusting rank to choose between them. Phoebe looked toward the archived floor arrangement, resting under Crowther's hand. Then we'll let him choose where he claims to have stood. On the morning of the 17th of November, Mr. Elias Crowther arrived at Mrs. Dunsmore's house with news that altered the shape of the coming confrontation. The former assistant, whom Lady Minerva had promised as her witness, had vanished from his lodging near Walcott. His trunk remained, his account was unpaid, and no servant could say whether he had fled from fear, been paid to disappear, or had never intended to remain. By noon, Lady Minerva had sent word that another man would testify in his place. Then she never depended upon one witness, Phoebe said. She depended upon confusion. Crowther placed his portfolio upon the drawing-room table. Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore sat near the open doors to the adjoining room, where propriety could be preserved without turning the conversation into ceremony. Peregrine stood beside the window. He had already read the note from the master of ceremonies, yet he did not offer a command or a theory. "Does his disappearance weaken the proof?" he asked. "No," Crowther replied. "It weakens only the appearance that Lady Minerva wished to create. Our evidence doesn't depend upon him." He opened the portfolio and reviewed the chain in plain order. The modified beechwood directing staff remained in the steward's cabinet beneath the joint seals of Crowther and the master of ceremonies. A plain comparison staff, made by the same workshop without a spring beneath its ferrule, had been delivered into the master of ceremonies' custody. The original copper rosette, removed from Phoebe's card on the 4th of November, remained sealed in Crowther's envelope, with Winifred's witnessed statement attached. The altered first violin part rested in its sealed folio case. The original spring bolt had been removed from the west salon door and sealed in a wooden box. The locksmith's working model remained separately marked. Certified extracts covered the workshop order book and committee accounts. Arabella Kenton's note remained sealed under the conditions she had imposed. Amos Reed's statement and Arabella's limited statement had both been signed voluntarily. The archived arrangement of the upper rooms from 1811 remained with the Master of Ceremonies, while Crowther held a certified copy. "Nothing is to be opened before the 20th, Phoebe asked. "Nothing except by the agreed witnesses," Crowther said. "The original rosette will be displayed, but not worn. The original bolt will be shown, but not operated. The working model will demonstrate the mechanism. The comparison rosette will be used in the quadrille." "And my buckle?" Phoebe asked. Crowther glanced toward the right slipper beneath her gown, where the shallow scratch crossed one silver leaf. "It remains yours. The locksmith recorded that the burr could have made the mark. But the buckle proves only that you crossed the threshold. It doesn't prove who moved the bolt." "Good." Peregrine's gaze rested briefly upon the scratched silver. "It should remain what it was before any of us needed it." "Her property," Crowther said. "Exactly." He closed the portfolio. "The extraordinary meeting will begin before the assembly. The subscription proprietors, selected patronesses, the master of ceremonies, the witnesses, and a magistrate's clerk will attend. He will record matters that may require formal proceedings, not turn the ballroom into a court." Phoebe nodded. "The order of proof remains mine." "It does." Crowther looked toward Peregrine. "His Grace has confirmed it in writing." Peregrine answered without hesitation. "As I should have from the beginning." Crowther left shortly afterward to meet the locksmith. Winifred remained at her escritoire with the connecting doors open. Peregrine stood before the cold fireplace, looking at the empty place where the portfolio had lain. Phoebe recognized the stillness in him. It no longer resembled the rage he had worn at the rehearsal. It was the stillness of a man deciding whether he could tell the truth without using it to ask for mercy. "You are thinking of Alice," she said. "I'm always thinking of Alice in some part of myself." He turned toward her. "But today I am thinking of what I made of her death." Phoebe waited. Peregrine did not cross the room. "Bath believes I stopped dancing because I despised society. Contempt looks stronger than fear." "What were you afraid of?" "That if music gave me pleasure again, I would have betrayed her." His voice remained low. "That if I entered another ballroom without anger, what happened to Alice would become ordinary. I made refusal into penance. I closed rooms because closure felt like loyalty." He looked toward the open doors beside Winifred. "Control spared me from grief. If I could command the room, I did not have to admit that I could not command the past." Phoebe felt the confession settle between them. "And when you saw me in the West Salon, you tried to command it again." "Yes." He did not defend himself. "I saw the same passage, the same family name, and the same prepared witnesses. For one moment, I was 6 years behind myself, trying to stop Alice from reaching the stair. But I was not Alice. No." Pain entered his face. "You were a living woman asking to speak, and I treated you like a memory I could lock away from danger." Phoebe crossed half the distance between them. "You changed what you did afterward, because you required me to. At first." She held his gaze. "Then you began to understand why." "I did. Alice didn't fight to make ballrooms into tombs. She fought because women were being moved toward doors they had not chosen." He looked at Phoebe with no shield left in his expression. "You've become the measure by which I know whether my conduct is honorable. Not whether you approve of me, whether you remain free beside me." He stopped there. He did not call it love. He did not use the nearness between them to claim what public repair had not yet fully earned. Phoebe stepped closer. "Peregrine." It was the first time she had spoken his name without title. His hand opened at his side but did not reach for her. "May I kiss you?" he asked. No rescue, apology, or rank was concealed inside the question. Phoebe answered plainly. "Yes." She crossed the final distance herself. Peregrine waited until she lifted her face. Then he bent and kissed her gently. His hand came to rest lightly at her waist only. After, she placed her palm against his chest. The kiss was unhurried and mutual. Phoebe felt the controlled breath he finally allowed to break, and the care with which he held back from taking more than she offered. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his for one quiet moment. He did not ask for another kiss. "I've wanted to do that since the empty ballroom," he said. "You were wise to wait. I'm learning that waiting can be an action." A difficult lesson for a duke. The most useful ones have been. They stepped apart before tenderness could become an escape from what awaited them. Peregrine drew a folded statement from his coat. Phoebe read the sentence he intended to speak before the proprietors. "My fear caused me to act too quickly." She crossed it out and wrote beneath it, "My fear led me to deny Miss Dunsmore the right to answer a public accusation made against her." Peregrine read the correction. "That's harder to say." "Because it names the harm." He folded the page carefully. "Then that's what I'll say." A knock sounded below. The servant brought a final message from the upper rooms. The western doors had been ordered, opened for the extraordinary meeting on the 20th. The same corridor, the same salon, and many of the same families would face the method in daylight before the evening candles were lit. Phoebe looked at Peregrine. He did not offer to stand before her. He only said, I'll be where you place me." "Beside the witnesses," she replied, "until I ask you to dance, on the afternoon of the 20th November." The Bath upper rooms filled before the chandeliers were lit. The extraordinary meeting had been called for the subscription proprietors, selected patronesses, invited witnesses, and the master of ceremonies. A magistrate's clerk sat near Mr. Elias Crowther with paper ready to record matters that might later require formal proceedings. Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore remained beside Phoebe. Mrs. Arabella Kenton sat near an open door with her chosen companion. Mr. Amos Reed stood where he could leave without crossing the floor. Miss Lydia Penrose stayed between her aunt and mother. Lady Minerva Haverstock occupied the front row in black silk. Dominic Haverstock stood behind her, composed enough to suggest that rank itself would answer every accusation. Peregrine entered last. The room quieted before he reached the centre. He unfolded one sheet. "Before Miss Dunsmore presents any evidence, I must answer for my conduct." She protected Miss Penrose by taking the marked rosette from her card. She entered the West Salon after receiving a false message. The door was bolted from the corridor. When she attempted to address this company, my fear led me to deny Miss Dunsmore the right to answer a public accusation made against her. Her removal wasn't evidence of guilt. The error was mine. The order of proof is hers. He folded the statement and stepped beside the witnesses. He did not stand before Phoebe or offer his arm. Phoebe crossed the ballroom alone. The scratched silver leaf upon her right buckle caught pale afternoon light. "The method has 4 parts," she said. "A woman is marked. The music is extended. The figure moves her toward a chosen place. A door is controlled by someone outside it." Crowther and the master of ceremonies inspected the joint seals upon the steward's cabinet, broke them before the room, and removed the wrapped beechwood directing staff. The Bath proprietor exposed the spring beneath its brass ferrule. He then lifted the plain comparison staff from separate custody. The plain wood made a dull tap. The altered ferrule gave 2 sharp clicks that carried beneath the musician's gallery. Crowther displayed the sealed envelope containing the original copper rosette removed from Phoebe's card on the 4th November. He did not open it. A different rosette from the remaining committee packet was pinned, with permission, to the card of a volunteer. "The original is evidence," Phoebe said. "This one is comparison." The orchestra played the lawful quadrille first. Couples changed places and finished in the centre, visible to the chaperones. Crowther then opened the sealed folio case. The first violin displayed the inserted 16 bars. The double click sounded. The phrase repeated. Partners shifted. Passing couples blocked the marked dancer from the benches. At the final turn, she stood beside the west passage. No one had pushed her. No impropriety had occurred. The room had moved her there while appearing perfectly elegant. A murmur spread through the witnesses. Phoebe waited until it subsided. Crowther next displayed the sealed wooden box, containing the original spring bolt removed from the salon door. The seals were inspected, but not broken. Beside it, the locksmith operated a clearly marked working model upon a prepared frame. The bolt could be thrown only from the corridor. He then identified the brass burr recorded at the threshold. "The scratch on my buckle proves only that I crossed the doorway," Phoebe said. "It doesn't prove who moved the bolt. The mechanism, the accounts, and the witnesses must do that." Crowther laid out certified extracts from the committee book. The entries appeared harmless. Alteration to west, retiring room, improvement to directing staff, musicians, gratuity, Settlement of subscription dispute. Phoebe matched their dates to the workshop order, the altered violin part, Arabella's payment, and 2 abrupt engagements after assemblies. No single phrase confesses the purpose, she said. The pattern appears only when the payments are placed beside what happened to the women. Arabella rose. She described the rosette, repeated music, false message, bolted salon, waiting witnesses, and payment demanded from her family. With her permission, Crowther opened Lady Minerva's note and read the warning that discretion would preserve every lady concerned. Amos followed. He claimed no more than he knew. Alice had brought out a frightened woman. Dominic had followed. Minerva had cleared the corridor. Amos had heard the bolt, then the fall. Dominic had returned through the green door with a torn cuff, and Minerva had supplied the family's story before anyone questioned him. Lydia then spoke, her voice trembling but audible. Miss Dunsmore took the rosette from my card because she knew where it would send me. Mrs. Dunsmore saw her do it. Winifred confirmed the transfer and the sealing afterward. The orchestra leader admitted Dominic had paid for the inserted bars as a fashionable variation. Lady Minerva rose before Phoebe could continue. This is a pageant arranged by a woman whose livelihood depends upon seeming indispensable. I've brought a man who assisted the dance master in 1811. He'll swear Miss Dunsmore invented the signal. A pale gentleman stepped forward. He claimed that Phoebe had directed the musicians from the western side of the gallery, and that the double click had never existed before her accusation. Phoebe unfolded the certified copy of the 1811 room arrangement. Where did the directing gentleman stand? Beside the first violins. Show us. He pointed to the western side. The master of ceremonies looked at the plan. That space held a fixed music stand in 1811. Phoebe indicated the marked position below the opposite gallery. From where you claim he stood, he couldn't have watched the west passage without turning his back upon the dancers. Nor could Miss Dunsmore have directed anyone in 1811. She wasn't present. The witness's face drained. Lady Minerva promised my debts would be settled. She said no one would be harmed. Dominic stepped forward. At worst, the committee arranged introductions. The staff and Bolt were conveniences. No woman was forced to accept a marriage. Then, why did families pay settlements after the same assemblies? Phoebe asked, to avoid gossip. Why did the altered bars always place the marked dancer beside the same room? Fashion. Were you in the West Passage when Lady Alice died? No. Amos looked at him. You were. Dominic's composure tightened. The old man is mistaken. Alice opened the outer door herself and ran toward the stair. Phoebe placed the archived arrangement beside him. The door you name couldn't be reached from the place. Amos saw her without passing the service entrance. You knew the green door was open. You knew the latch. Your cuff was torn when you returned. Through it. That proves nothing. Then tell the room how you came through a door you now claim you never approached. Silence held him more firmly than accusation. Dominic looked toward Minerva, but she gave him no rescue. Alice followed me, he said at last. She threatened to expose the settlements. We argued over the service passage. She tried to reach the latch. She lost her footing. I didn't intend for her to fall. Minerva rose sharply. She couldn't have reached that latch after I ordered Reed below. Phoebe turned to her. How do you know the exact moment Mr. Reed was removed and which latch Lady Alice could reach? Minerva's face changed. She had revealed not grief, but knowledge. The room understood it. Peregrine did not strike Dominic or shout. He instructed the master of ceremonies to remove Dominic from every subscription office. He dismissed him from all Westerdale estate duties and suspended the voluntary allowance under ducal control. Crowther transferred the statements, accounts, evidence of false imprisonment, intimidation, and misuse of entrusted funds for examination by the magistrate. Lady Minerva was removed from patroness authority and barred from Westerdale households. Arabella's name would not be published without consent. Amos's pension remained secure. Lydia was released from every arrangement connected to Dominic's circle. Only after the clerk had recorded those decisions did the evening assembly begin. Lydia was offered the first quadrille. She looked past the gentleman her mother had favoured and chose a quiet young man of her own preference. The room accepted her choice. When the figure ended, Phoebe crossed toward Peregrine. "Your Grace, will you dance with me?" Emotion entered his face. "If you'll lead the first step." The musicians began a waltz, simple and unaltered. Peregrine waited for Phoebe's movement before following. When the music ended, they stood in an open alcove within Winifred's sight. Phoebe left her hand in his. "I love you, Phoebe," he said. "I love the woman you are when no one is applauding." Her eyes filled, but her answer was steady. "I love you, Peregrine, and I choose you with my eyes open." He lifted her gloved knuckles and kissed them. "May I call tomorrow as a man who hopes to court you?" Phoebe smiled. "You may call once. What follows will depend upon how well you continue to listen." The next morning, Peregrine called at Mrs. Dunsmore's house without flowers, jewels, or any gift that might turn gratitude into obligation. He arrived at the proper hour, left his card, and waited until Mrs. Winifred Dunsmore had taken her place near the window before entering the drawing-room. Phoebe received him beside the same table that had once held returned lesson books. Two of those families had since sent apologies. One had not. She preferred the truth of that unevenness to a perfect recovery no society could honestly promise. Peregrine bowed. "I said I hoped to court you. Before I begin, tell me what I mustn't do." Phoebe studied him. "Don't send expensive gifts while my answer is undecided." "I won't. Don't let anyone suggest that my restored name is part of your courtship. It isn't. And don't attend my lessons unless I invite you." A brief warmth entered his eyes. "That may be the severest condition." "You'll survive it. I've survived 6 seasons without dancing. I may endure a few weeks without correcting anyone's posture." Winifred hid a smile behind her teacup. Proper courtship followed, steady rather than theatrical. Peregrine made morning calls at acceptable hours. He joined chaperoned drives through Bath and dined where Phoebe's professional work was spoken of without apology. He wrote letters that asked what she thought rather than telling her what she ought to feel. Phoebe answered when she chose. He did not send jewels. He did not place his carriage outside her door, so often that curiosity became pressure. When one former pupil returned with her mother, Peregrine remained in the hall until Phoebe invited him to observe the final figure. He stood near the wall and followed every instruction she gave, even when a girl of 16 corrected his timing. Phoebe noticed that he remembered each pupil's name. Society did not transform all at once. Some families returned. Others continued to avoid her. One patroness who had withdrawn support sent no apology but began greeting Phoebe again in public, as though civility could erase cowardice. Phoebe accepted the greeting and nothing more. Lydia Penrose changed more visibly. When her mother proposed an introduction to one of Dominic's former associates, Lydia said, "No, Mama, I don't wish to meet him." Her aunt supported the refusal, and the patronesses, who had witnessed the inquiry, did not permit Mrs. Penrose to turn it into disobedience. Dominic remained Peregrine's blood cousin and heir presumptive. Because exposure could not rewrite succession, he did not remain committee treasurer, estate officer, or beneficiary of Peregrine's voluntary allowance. The accounts, witness statements, altered music, staff mechanism, and intimidation attempts were laid before the magistrate. Formal proceedings began. No immediate conviction was invented to satisfy gossip. Lady Minerva withdrew from Bath patronage after her authority was removed. Peregrine barred her from Westerdale households and arranged separate residence appropriate to her station, but without influence over his servants, tenants, or guests. Amos Reed received written confirmation that his pension could not be touched by any Haverstock office Dominic had controlled. Arabella Kenton permitted a limited account of the coercive method to enter the subscription record. Her unrelated letters remained private. In the minutes of the upper rooms, Lady Alice Haverstock was no longer described merely as a distressed young woman who fled after a quarrel with her brother. The amended record stated that she had protected a frightened woman and attempted to expose a pattern of arranged compromise and private payments. Peregrine read the entry once. He said nothing for several minutes. Then he closed the book without closing the room. On the 6th of January 1818, he called at Mrs. Dunsmore's house and asked to speak in the drawing-room with Winifred present. He brought no ring in his hand. "Phoebe," he said, "I love you. I've said it before a room that needed to hear me stand beside you. I'm saying it now because I want you to know what remains when no one else is listening." She held his gaze. "What remains? The woman I trust. The woman whose freedom matters to me more than the comfort of being obeyed." He took one breath. "Will you marry me? If I refuse, nothing already owed to you changes. Your name, your pupils, your protection, and every public correction remain yours. And if I become Duchess of Westerdale, your work remains yours to continue or leave. I won't turn marriage into another room you cannot exit." Phoebe looked at the man who had once believed every danger required a closed door. He waited before one now. "Then yes," she said, "I'll marry you." Relief broke across his face with such openness that she laughed softly. "May I come closer?" he asked. "You may." He crossed the distance only after her answer. Phoebe placed both hands in his. When he bent to kiss her, she lifted her face freely. The kiss was warm, unhurried, and certain. It held no conquest, only promise. Their marriage settlement preserved Phoebe's personal earnings, inherited possessions, and right to continue instruction. The silver leaf pattern buckles remained hers. Winifred received a secure residence independent of Peregrine's favor. An annual fund was established for gentlewomen facing coerced engagements or demands for private settlements, and Phoebe insisted that its decisions rest with several trustees rather than the Duke alone. 3 banns were read on successive Sundays. On the 10th February, they married in a Bath parish church before family, selected friends, former pupils, and witnesses whose names no longer needed to be hidden. When the ceremony ended, Peregrine did not automatically lead her down the aisle. He waited. Phoebe offered her hand. Only then did he take it. 2 weeks later, pale winter sunlight filled the upper rooms for a young ladies' assembly. The revised subscription conditions were practical rather than miraculous. No lady was required to explain a refusal. Any gentleman who persisted after one could be removed from the list. Side rooms remained attended. No external corridor bolt could be used during an assembly. Chaperone sightlines were preserved. No identifying rosette could be pinned without the dancer's knowledge. Gossip had not vanished, but the room would no longer lend official authority to coercion. A shy young woman declined a set. The gentleman pressed once. The master of ceremonies intervened, and the girl returned to her friends without being made to defend herself. Lydia chose not to dance the first set at all. No one compelled her. Phoebe entered as the Duchess of Westerdale. Yet the master of ceremonies introduced her as the woman who had designed the safer arrangement. She wore a simple pale gown and the old silver buckles. The scratch across the right leaf remained. After the pupils left and the musicians began packing their parts, Peregrine waited at the place where Phoebe had stood alone on opening night. He did not occupy the center. She crossed the quiet ballroom toward him. "Will you dance with me?" she asked. He offered his hand. "Will you lead the first step?" They moved through the empty room without an audience. Peregrine followed her count without hesitation. At the final turn, the scratched buckle caught the winter light. "I love you," he said. Phoebe smiled and drew him closer. "I love you too." She lifted her face. Peregrine waited for the invitation in her eyes before kissing her. His arms closed around her with familiar tenderness, and Phoebe held him in return. Beyond them, the western doors remained open and attended. Beneath them, every step was chosen.